Ooh, another white boy with a podcast. Pronouns, Jim Bro. Another white boy with a podcast. You want to see the video? It went viral.
Hi Gains Gurus and welcome to TMGP, the Muscle Growth Podcast, episode 33. I am your host, Roscoe, and today we're welcoming Jeffrey Siegel onto the show. Jeffrey is a prominent health coach and educator known for his integrative approach to wellness, particularly in the realm of men's health. He is the founder and CEO of Jeffrey Siegel Wellness, where he empowers individuals, especially men, to regain energy, confidence, and balance in their lives. His coaching philosophy emphasizes a holistic view of health, combining mindfulness, movement, and education to foster transformative change in his clients' lives. Jeff's journey into health coaching was influenced by his personal battles with an eating disorder during his teenage years. This experience led him to seek help and ultimately reshape his understanding of health and well-being. He holds a master's degree in mind and brain education from Harvard University and a degree in Buddhist Studies from Hong Kong University, where he focused on integrating psychology and spirituality into health practices. As a certified personal trainer and dynamic eating psychologist, Jeff has developed a range of coaching services aimed at enhancing physical and emotional well-being. His work includes executive coaching for self-care and work-life balance, as well as teaching mindfulness and stress management techniques. He also facilitates workshops on self-compassion and healthy relationships. In November 2015, Jeff helped create a TED Talk titled What Makes Muscles Grow, which has garnered millions of views. In this presentation, he discusses the biological mechanisms behind muscle growth, emphasizing the importance of sleep, nutrition, and exercise. He explains that effective muscle development requires intentional challenge and recovery, highlighting how factors such as hormones and genetics play critical roles in this process. Jeffrey believes that many individuals are not adequately taught how to care for their bodies or maintain their health. Through his work, he aims to provide the necessary resources and support for people to live healthier lives. His approach is characterized by a commitment to fostering communities that support individual growth and well-being. In summary, Jeffrey is a dedicated health coach who combines personal experience with professional expertise to help others achieve sustainable wellness through an integrative approach that encompasses both body and mind. In today's episode, we dive into a wide range of insights. Some of the topics include Jeff's journey through severe eating disorder into health coach, masculinity, the importance of education and physical activity, why I work out, finding your deeper motivation, why do people have the lifestyle that they have and build routines that they do, physical and mental health and health span and lifespan, the importance of setting goals, and so much more. Get ready for a truly informative episode. If you're injured or in recovery, visit theinjuryconsultant.com and schedule a free consultation to explore how I can support your healing, restoration, and journey to thriving health. The Injury Consultant now also offers specialized packages for fat loss, muscle gain, and longevity. Interested? Book your free consult today. A little disclaimer. This show does not contain medical advice. The views and opinions expressed by guests on the Muscle Growth Podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect my beliefs or the stance of the podcast. While we aim to provide valuable insights and information, it's important to approach all topics with critical thinking. I encourage you to do your own research, consider multiple perspectives, and form your own conclusions. Healthy discussion is always welcome, and I'm happy to engage with listeners in the comments to continue the conversation. Lastly, don't forget to follow us on all major social media platforms, including Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and X. Find us at the Muscle Growth Podcast and myself at Reps with Roscoe.
Welcome, Jeff, to the Muscle Growth Podcast, where we explore subjects related to muscle science and hypertrophy. I'm thrilled to have you join us for today's conversation. Let's jump right in and dig into some exciting topics together. Can you briefly introduce yourself and your journey into the world of being a fitness coach and a wellness consultant?
Yeah, I usually trace back my journey to being, around when I was 14, 15, I developed a severe eating disorder, right? And that really was a difficult experience as a teenager where, like, on one hand, I just wanted to be this normal kid. I was, at that time kind of getting exposed to like gym and, when you're hitting puberty and your hormones are going crazy and you're looking around and you're trying to figure out, what do I do with all this energy? What do I do with all this drive, both physical and sexual? And I think, I was just kind of this confused adolescent. My mind went to war with my body. I basically stopped eating. And, there was a tremendous power I felt in that, right? In being able to overcome this impulse of hunger and be really, really rigid and regimented when it came to my food intake. And I learned so much around nutrition and calories, but it was all coming from this really disordered place of control and a place of fear. And it almost led me to kill myself, right? I lost so much weight that I had to drop out of school. I was hospitalized. It was a very severe condition. So really everything in my life since then has kind of been, informed by that. And the trajectory I've taken has been to tie together these pieces of like, why the hell did that happen to me? And how can I heal myself and then also help others avoid some of those pitfalls, right? So I learned everything I could about the body and biology and training. I learned about neuroscience and trying to understand like why human behavior, right, like happens the way it does. Got a little bit disillusioned with boiling everything down to neurotransmitter imbalances and kind of the scientific reductionist piece. So then I actually went and lived in Asia for many years. I studied Buddhism and other Eastern spiritual traditions. I was looking for, some bigger spiritual context for, what happened to me. What does it mean to live a good, healthy, happy life? And then came back to try to kind of blend those things together. That's what really started my work. Initially in the gym, doing a lot of personal training, athletic training, and then transitioning now to just, private and group coaching with men who really want to build a better relationship with their body, right? And to have more confidence in themselves. Obviously, building muscle is a huge part of that, but ultimately, right, so they can have more energy, they can have more strength, and so they can be more present, right, at home with their families, at work. And I think all that feeds into, living a life of purpose.
Wow. Well, that's beautiful. I'm really sorry that you went through those things, but I love the way that you managed to turn that around and use that to guide yourself in your decisions to become the person you are today. And now you're wanting to help people, especially people that might have been through similar things that you went through. And I think that's a really beautiful message. So huge congratulations to you.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, man. And, look, we all face adversity in our lives, and it shows up in so many different ways, right? For me, like, this was very clear, this sort of mind-body trauma that I had that landed me where I was. And I was so fortunate to have so much support along the way, from family, from professionals, from friends. Of course, not everybody got it. Not everybody was supportive, but I had a lot of resources to help me get back on track. And that's key, because whenever you're facing adversity and challenge, you need to both have some internal strengths to draw upon, and then you need to have external supports. And this is foundational in the coaching work that I do, like helping guys figure out, okay, what are the inner resources that you need to build up for yourself that are going to help you show up as the man that you want to be? And then how can we build those external structures, all right, to help support that? And that goes true with training, with nutrition, right? With everything that's happening, in the gym, outside of the gym.
No, absolutely. Like you mentioned, it's a whole lot of factors. And I love that you mentioned the importance of having a support structure. And like you said, you were fortunate enough to have one. And I love that now you could be that support structure for some people, some men, like you said, who are looking for help. And now you're offering help and giving back almost, which is a beautiful thing to be doing. So thank you for that.
You're welcome, man. I mean, it's clear. I didn't get into this line of work to, like sell a bunch of products or, make a ton of cash. Like I got into it again, first and foremost for my own healing to try to kind of figure out, right? Like, what does it mean to be a healthy, happy, self-actualized, man on this planet? And then also to help others be able to do the same. And so like, there is a lot of heart in what I do. I try to bring that into everything.
It's very similar to another guest we had, Riley Jarvis, who it's not the same thing that happened, obviously, but you can draw parallels. He had Crohn's disease, and he basically went and he tried to figure out how to help himself. And then from that, he was able to develop a really amazing profession in helping others to do that. So it's a similar parallel there, where originally it was to help yourself, and then you realized, hey, this worked for me. Maybe I can implement these strategies to help other people. So that's really amazing. Congrats to you.
I mean, there's the archetype of sort of the wounded healer, right? Like the person that goes through these trials and then comes out of it having gained some insight and wisdom, right, that they can then share. And I think that's really valuable, right? But I also want to be clear that, I think we can sometimes get into tricky territory, with the whole like, N equals 1. I never want to presume that what worked for me is going to work for you. And I know that's something that you talked about in your podcast, right? Like you gotta take all of this information. There's so much knowledge out there. There's so many ideas. You got to apply it to yourself. You got to kind of sort through what works, right? So I'm never here to tell anybody like, hey, you need to do this, or this is how you should live your life. But I certainly want to help guide people. I want to help elicit their own knowledge and wisdom to try to help them find what the right next step is going to be.
I think I might be part of that archetype that you just mentioned, because I also had a similar background where I was injured and things, and now I like to help people recover from injuries. So that's quite interesting. I didn't.
Right, I know. That came to mind. I know you're working on the injury prevention stuff or rehab, which is that's such an important piece of that. I got a story around that too. It's we could get into it, but I know you got some other questions.
Yeah, we've got a lot, so we're going to get through them now. Last piece on this. Do you mind chatting about just very briefly, what was that adversity in life? You mentioned that it was to do with hormones, battling hormones. Was it also social media related, or peers, or bullying, or what was the driving force, or you're not sure?
Yeah. So those two last pieces you mentioned, right? Like social media didn't really exist at that point when I was in high school. Thankfully, like that was not an influence. Whereas now I think this is a huge, huge part of, both adults and teenagers' lives in some positive ways. But as we're seeing with a lot of just, both data and anecdotal stuff, right? Like in a lot of negative ways around body dissatisfaction, promoting disordered eating habits or body dysmorphia. Like there's so many things that, you can kind of point to social media really exacerbating a lot of these issues. That was not it for me. It wasn't bullying either. Actually, I studied martial arts from a very young age. If anything,
so you weren't scared.
I was probably one of the most dangerous kids, in the schoolyard. But there was a lot of things that go into disordered eating, and we could spend an entire episode kind of unpacking all of that. There's issues of control. I think that there's that transition again from sort of like boyhood into adolescence, puberty into manhood, and this comes up again and again, where in our kind of secularized Western society, we have lost so many of the rites of passage that, boys would typically go through, where there would be elders that would come and kind of take them and help guide them through some of that adversity to show them, hey, this is what it is like to be, a man, to be both strong and compassionate and all of these things. So I feel like I never really got any of that. So there's this kind of confusion of like, okay, again, I'm feeling all of these feelings. I have all this energy. What do I do with it? I didn't have a whole lot of role models or guidance for me to help that. So there was this issue of, oh, there's this huge world out there that's like so freaking big and I can't control most of it. But you know what I can control? I can control every lingual thing that goes into my mouth, right? I can control all of these calories, or I can control what I do with my body. So it was a way of kind of like, internalizing this lack of control through food. Obviously issues of like perfectionism wrapped into that, feeling like I had really high expectations and standards, both from myself, but then from my parents and from others around, what I was able to achieve academically and athletically. And I think there was also, issues, I call them issues, like I've always had a very acute sense of what is going on in my body internally, right? So like that, what is often referred to as interoception, right? If you look into the scientific literature, that ability to sense, things like digestion, like your heart rate, and so a lot of these signals that I would get from my body tend to be very strong and amplified. And I think for me, dealing with digestive issues and other things, like a lot of times it was just easier for me not to eat, right? So like being in a fasted state actually felt more comfortable because I didn't have to deal with all of these messy signals from my body about what was going on. So I think that also played a contributing factor in me kind of developing the disordered habits that I had. And I could go on. I think there was a spiritual level to it. There's issues around like, masculinity. What does it mean to be a man, a strong man, and so on, so many things that probably all came together and just landed in this way.
It sounds like you've had a lot of time to reflect on it, and well done for doing it. I think a lot of people have never really taken the time to reflect on their past and on things that maybe didn't go very well. And I like the way that you've seen that having a guide and things is so important especially for men who maybe don't reach out as much as females, just in general. I don't know if that's true, but I think a lot of men struggle to reach out and ask for help. And a lot of people in general don't have that guide or that role model to kind of show them the way. I think, like you mentioned, back, maybe not in modern times as much, but back in the day, I think a lot more people had that role model, the chief in the community or the person they could look up to, the spiritual leader. Whereas now it's a lot more diverse. So you have more options, but they maybe not quite as close. Maybe through social media or something, you can follow someone, but it's not that one-to-one connection where you have someone there holding your hand, so to speak, to guide you on your way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a really a big difference between having, a mentor, a coach, just someone in your life that's like very like physically present there with you, interacting, and there's this ongoing relationship that you have with them. And this isn't to say that you can't learn so much from people online or that you can't actually build relationships. But I find that, they often just tend to be more superficial, right, and shallow. And there's a lot of, this is another issue around men these days that is talked about, kind of the crisis of masculinity and how a lot of, men, especially young men, feeling isolated and lonely. And social media online is like such a great place to go and build that sense of connection and belonging, which we all want and we all need that. And yet I think, sometimes that can end up in these sort of destructive ways, right, where people hijack that need for belonging. And it can turn almost into sort of these, these cultish tribal sort of affiliations where, you cling to a certain, guru, leader person that, claims to have it all figured out. Right. And, I'm not going to name names on that, but like, choose your person out there in the social media world. And, it's like, so these issues around isolation, belonging, and affiliation start to get really sticky.
Exactly. And I think COVID-19, the pandemic, also exacerbated the loneliness issue. And it's great now that we can see people again in person. But I think that time in lockdown really pushed people to their limits.
I totally agree, man. How did it impact you? Like, what did you notice? Did things change for you?
So yeah, obviously isolation was very challenging, but I was very fortunate to be able to stay with my family. So it helped a lot having them around, and so I wasn't completely alone. But it definitely was very lonely in the sense of you weren't connected to your peers anymore and your extended family. But I was very fortunate to still have some immediate family in my surroundings. And yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And when I reflect back on that time, I really kind of saw it go both ways. And if we're looking at kind of how did it impact people's health and well-being, and for some people, I saw them really take advantage of this opportunity. They're like, hey, I've got more time than I had before. If I'm stuck at home, but I've got this, dusty old dumbbell set in the back that I've never touched. Right. And I saw some people really start to transform their health. They're like, you know what, I'm going to use this time and actually build myself up so I can come out of this better. And then there's other people that kind of went down the other way of what the hell, fuck it. Right. There's a lot of despair and a lot of anxiety, a lot of, just eating for comfort because, the world seems so uncertain and crazy, which, makes it so much sense. But then also kind of just not taking care of themselves. And I think this goes back to, that idea of support, right? Whenever we're faced with challenge, right, it's the matter of both our inner compass, where are we pointing it? And then how are the supports around us helping us navigate that? If we have the right compass and the right supports, we can come out of that so much stronger. All right. But if we don't, then it's gonna break us down, right? It might leave us off in a worse place.
Sure. Yeah. And you make a great point about how different people react to strenuous situations differently. And that's a great point. Your academic path is fascinating. With a bachelor's in neuroscience, a master's in Buddhist Studies from Hong Kong, and a master's in education from Harvard. How have these experiences shaped your approach to men's wellness and coaching?
Yeah. I mean, I joke that I'm thoroughly overeducated and confused. I think when the more you get wrapped up in the academic world, the more you begin to realize how much we don't know. For me, as I kind of alluded to in my, story of how did I end up doing this work? It was initially, looking through this lens of science and biology of okay, what does a healthy body look like? Right. And when we're looking at it through the lens of hormones, and neurotransmitters, and then how does that influence how we're going to move our body and how we're going to rest our body? So really understanding, the metabolism, the physiology, the biomechanics of training, and yet all of that, as important as that stuff is, which I think really empowered me to learn how to move my body, how to train well in the gym, right? How to really gain a certain degree of mastery over movement and muscle. But then, all of that in isolation can start to feel pretty empty. It's what's the point in being really strong? And what's the point in having all of this muscle? What is it in service of? And I think that's what then led me to go study some of the Eastern spiritual traditions. And I kind of grew up, in a, spiritual void where my family was pretty secular, didn't have strong traditions. So I kind of had to find them for myself. And that was an opportunity for me to just, learn from, there's so much wisdom, in the Taoist and Buddhist and some of these other lineages that I thought was helpful, especially around the mind training. I was interested in, altered states of consciousness. What does it mean to become enlightened? And really how does the mind relate to the body and the ways in which that can be harmonious and functional. And then obviously the ways in which it can be totally the opposite, which I experienced, and I think we all have, even in just the day to day, right? Everybody's probably had those moments where that little inner critic shows up, right? To kind of, kick you in the ass and then tell you how you're doing everything wrong, or, try to, force your body to go do something, and we end up in these wars with ourselves. And so just learning more about that and then pulling it back together at Harvard, where I was trying to really synthesize sort of Eastern and Western perspectives in service of learning and development, right? I was okay, how can we help people live better lives? And I spent many years as a teacher. So I was teaching in Hong Kong for so many years, and this had been said before, but so much of the education system, right, really just treats us, right, as these heads that are just being teleported around on bodies, right? And we just really neglect everything from the shoulder on down when it comes to learning. And I had students coming to me, looking for guidance. Initially it was like, they wanted some help on this paper. But the more I would talk to them about their life and what was coming up, the more I realized that it wasn't so much a struggle, to like figure out academically whether they needed to like complete this assignment. It was that so many of these, young adults were not taking good care of themselves, right? Like they weren't eating right. They weren't sleeping well. They were really stressed out. They didn't know how to manage all these expectations from society, right? It's like, so there was all of these upstream lifestyle factors that were getting in the way of them learning anything in school at all. And I was like, hey, if I really want to help these people and be of service, like I need to focus more on the lifestyle piece. And I think that's what motivated me after I finished my other master's degree to go off into the coaching world and to help people build more balanced lifestyles, to tell this more holistic picture of, human development.
We're talking about so many cool things. We're going to have to pull back to the topics. But just on that, do you then think that education is failing? Because, for example, in South Africa, we have PE for one period a week. And then there's no stress management. There's no physical exercise, the importance of it, or sleep or health. There's none of that. Maybe very briefly for like one sentence or two sentences in a subject we have called life orientation, but no one really takes that subject too seriously because it's not presented as a serious module. So do you think that maybe worldwide, obviously it's not, you can't generalize, but for a lot of education systems, do you think that maybe it's failing to give the importance of being physically healthy, emotionally healthy, and mentally healthy too?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the failure is the inability to see how taking care of your physicality is also taking care of your mental and emotional health, and vice versa, right? And how interrelated these pieces are. And that if we truly want to educate children, right, if we want to help prepare the next generation to become the leaders, right, we can't neglect the body issue, right? And we can just look around, you can see how generally unhealthy, at least over here in the United States, people tend to be. And we get so little guidance on that from education. Part of my overall mission is to bring a lot of the things that I teach, back into the education system in some way, right? I think some of these fundamental skills like strength training, like cooking, like basic kind of macronutrient awareness, like understanding, proteins, fats, and carbs, and, just also understanding where food comes from, recognizing that it comes from the land and the soil, and like really helping kids take more ownership over how they move and how they eat is so vital, right? I think that is necessary to become, a healthy adult, and we're really missing a lot of opportunities. And so then, a lot of kids get out of school, and it's like they don't know how to cook, right? Like they don't know where their food comes from, other than like ordering takeout on their phone. And of course, I'm sort of being hyperbolic, but it's there's a certain degree of truth to that, and I think that to me that is sad, and I wish that the education world would begin to see the mind and the body as both vital pieces of this puzzle, right? And there's so much, I think there's a lot of evidence to show that, like, when you give kids opportunities, right, to be more physically active, not only, there's so many effects, like that helps them then if they do need to sit in place, right, and just kind of, do some rote learning, which again is somewhat of a antiquated thing, especially now as we're entering an AI world. I think we're going to completely need to re-envision what education means, what assessment means, and so we're at an interesting point in time where I'm it's this crisis where I think there's a lot of things that are broken, and there's a lot of opportunity for us to go back and say, hey, we can educate people physically. We can educate their character and their virtue. We can help them be critical thinkers. And that doesn't all have to happen just sitting in one place for 8 hours a day, feeding your body, ultra processed stuff and pretending that it's just there to carry around your head.
Sure. Yeah, there's a, a lot to unpack there. But I think it goes back to schooling originally, if I'm not mistaken, being there to create factory workers, not to create critical thinkers. Because critical thinkers maybe aren't quite as productive as a factory line worker who's just there doing something, manual labor. If they always thinking for themselves and things, then they might be opposing the things that you tell them to do, or they might not be that good at following instructions or orders because they're thinking of better ways or different ways to do that, which doesn't make a good factory worker. I think it was Rockefeller who initially funded a lot of schooling, at least in the US. I'm not sure about that. Obviously, I'm not from there, but is that true?
You're bringing up a good point around, what is the purpose of education itself? Like, what is the purpose of schools, right? Is it to produce good factory workers, right? Or just to help people, fuel economic development, right? So the goal of the education, right, is to get a job, right? Is to produce some sort of employee, right? Or is the purpose of school more of this sort of liberal arts notion of like to develop a well-rounded, raw, breadth of knowledge of multiple things that is going to help somebody live with, certain, virtue and character in life, and so on and so forth. And the reality is that nobody really agrees. And there are different schools that have different purposes. But overall, like if you look at the public education system, yes, a lot of it did come from the need to kind of produce, workers. Also, as again, that's my understanding, right? Like through the Industrial Revolution, as more and more people started themselves working in factories, right? More parents started working. They needed to do something with their kids, right? And so like school became this place where like they could put the kids while the parents were working in the factories, the kids could go in this thing, which then ultimately would prepare them to work in the factories. Again, oversimplification, but I think there's a certain truth in that.
For sure.
And I think it goes to this larger question of, what is the purpose of education? And, a question that I'd love to ask you, based upon this podcast, right, of like, what's the purpose in growing muscle?
Well, I'm not even joking. That was literally the next question I was going to ask you. And that's one of the main reasons that you're here is, what is the significance of muscle and physical strength? That was literally the next question I was going to ask you. But for me, I think the importance of muscle, there's so many things, but it's really good for your longevity. For me, is one of the main points about it. And being physically strong is so important just for daily tasks, for all kinds of things, for anything you do physically, whether it's taking the shopping bags out the car or whether it's deadlifting 250 kilograms. It's just amazing what the human body is capable of. And we're really fortunate to be human. The humans are really an elite species in terms of being able to sweat, being able to go long distances. There's no other animal that has the exact same kind of features as a human. Being able to throw. I watched a really cool docu-series about how kind of overpowered the human body is in terms of the different things that we've been given. For example, the brain, the size of the brain, the ability to throw like a spear, the ability to create tools, and then also the ability to hunt and track prey for days on end is really a uniquely human feature, which is really, really cool. And then, like I said, I think it's I've actually gone blank on her name, but one of the very good doctors, she basically said that muscle is the organ of longevity. And I've heard that repeat. It's Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, I believe. And a lot of these really top doctors, they've all said, I also had Dr. Von der Wright on the show. She also said that muscle is the most important thing for living a good, healthy life. And Dr. Peter Attia as well, he also in his book Outlive, he also talks about muscle mass being a really good indicator for living a long and healthy life. If you don't have muscle, you're going to decline a lot more quickly in general. Obviously, as we've done a lot here, we've done a lot of oversimplification, but in general, more muscle to a point, I think, is better for you and for living a long and healthy life. And that's the main thing that I'm trying to do, is to help people to increase not only their lifespan, but their health span, and having more muscle and being physically able to get up if you fall, for example, is a huge thing. So that's why I like to get muscle. And also it's really cool to be able to pick up heavy things.
So you mentioned the longevity piece, right? And there's no question that is essential. Muscle is really, really important for us, from practical strength to, the improving outcomes after things like falls, which tend to be so devastating when you get older, because a lot of strength training also improves, bone density, to obviously the metabolic health that it can provide. We can dip into each one of those buckets. And yet I wonder though, like, is that what actually gets you going into the gym or working on your own training? Is it the longevity piece, or is there something else?
For me, it's definitely, so I'm definitely addicted to it as well. I think it's a good addiction to have. I love seeing the progress. So I played a lot of sport growing up, a lot of tennis, a lot of squash, a lot of hockey, and but I dabbled in many, many sports. But for me, the gym, it's definitely the easiest to kind of measure your progress. You can literally just increase your bench, squat, and deadlift, and you can see, hopefully you get a somewhat linear progression. Obviously you get diminishing returns after a stage, but I've noticed a definite trend in increasing the numbers, as well as tracking what your body looks like, just looking in the mirror and getting your body analysis done on an in-body scan or DEXA scan. And it's just really, really epic to be able to see the improvements from maybe not day to day or even week to week, but possibly month to month or year to year. And it's just really, really cool to be able to see that consistent improvement, but also then to, when you get injured, to then be able to come back to your baseline a lot more quickly than if you just stopped everything. And that's why the healing from injuries and stuff is a big component for me, because I've been really seriously injured. And the advice for me from doctors and physicians and all kinds of knowledgeable people was just rest. And I don't think, and obviously for some people that is, like, if you're really, really bad, maybe that is the best thing to do. But for a lot of people, like for me, that was not the best thing to do. Like, for example, I had a wrist injury. I still had 3 other limbs that I could have trained, and I did. But like, they just said, just don't do anything. Just give it like several months to heal. And I'm like, well, I can't do that. I'm going to completely atrophy. And I did when I was really injured with my back injury. And I just never want anyone to have to do that again. Obviously, if it is so bad that you literally can't, then that's a different story. But for most people, I think there are ways to work around it. Interesting guest we had on was Jared from Unbreakable Strength. He went into hospital, and basically the only thing that saved his life was his muscle mass that he'd accrued from powerlifting. If he didn't have, he was known as Miracle Man. He lost, I think it was 40 kilograms, mostly muscle. And if he didn't have that initial muscle, he would have died, which is really, it shows you the power of muscle in terms of your body's resilience he had a major disease or illness. But just for that, as well as for aging in a good way.
Yeah. And I think you use the words that, you're somewhat addicted to it. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's not so much. I like to do things properly. And I think that training, I've always been big into training from tennis and from squash. So I would always do sport every single day. Now I do sport basically every day, or train every day, minus one day where I have for rest. And then I do cardio like tennis, squash, or paddle once a week. At least I try to. And it's not so much an addiction. It's more of I guess I misspoke there by saying it's an addiction, but I think the results are addictive. So I think that is the addictive part. But for me, I like seeing the constant progression, and it's more of a routine. So I'm very happy in my routine. We know we have gym every day. We have a very strict schedule or program. We try not to deviate as much as possible. My girlfriend and I, we do it together. So it's nice to spend time with her as well as to see all your friends and peers in the gym. So it's something that we can look forward to at the end of every day.
So for you, having the physical training just be part of your daily routine is something that's just engineered into your life.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Since the age of, I was on the tennis court. My mom was coaching at the time. She was a top tennis player herself. And from the age of 4, I was playing against people a lot older than me, being on the court next to my mom and with the coaches and things.
Yeah. And, if you didn't have that routine, what would be different? How would that impact you?
I have no idea. I think if I didn't have that routine, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. So I think that hole would have been filled with something else, maybe gaming or computer games or something, because I did love my computer games up until 2019 when I realized I didn't have time, or I couldn't be making time for computer games as well as studying my computer science degree and playing tennis and gymming and it just, something had to go. And I decided that the computer games needed to be that thing to go, because I loved my computer games, and but that wasn't benefiting me as much as obviously studying and training and exercise and all the rest of it.
So that seems like a pretty important point when you then decided, you know what, if I'm going to have to build my routines, I'm going to let go of the gaming and I'm going to focus on the training. Yeah.
It was a difficult decision. And I still miss it. I know it's crazy, but that was in 2019. It's 5 years later, and I see my brother playing that game that I used to play on my old account, just by the way. And I get a pang of, that still looks like a lot of fun. It still looks good, but it's not worth the time investment, I don't believe. And for some people, it is. Some people, their entire career is gaming, and they make money off it. So then, that's epic. Maybe I should have done that, and then I could have trained as a hobby. But anyway, I digress.
Well, no, I ask these questions because I'm always trying to boil down to, like, what is the deeper motivation that's getting you to show up in the gym consistency? And I'm saying in the gym, obviously, you don't have to work out in the gym, but the question that's always on my mind, right, and the one that has sort of intellectually fascinated me for all these years is, why do people build the routines that they build, right? Why do people ultimately kind of have the lifestyle that they have? And I hear you saying that it's like you could have had a lifestyle where, like, you just did gaming all day, but instead you kind of had this one now where training has become key. And I'm assuming that most of the people listening here, right, are probably in that group, right, where training is just part of their daily routine. And everybody that I see that's, really successful in terms of, building muscle, maintaining a high degree of fitness, right, is like, it's always about that consistency. And the consistency comes from having it be part of your routine. It's just something that happens, and it's something that you look forward to, right? Because everybody understands that exercise is important. Right? At the intellectual level, everybody knows, like, it's good for my health, it's good for my longevity, right? Like, maybe not everybody fully understands, the gravity of, again, how significant muscle is for their physical and their mental health and their, as you said, their lifespan and their health span. But I think most people get an idea, right? Like, yeah, exercise is important. And yet, you look around and there are millions and millions and millions and millions of people that don't do any exercise. Right. And I know those are not necessarily the people listening to this, but that's always on my mind of, like, okay, like, why? Like, it's clear that, like, an intellectual knowledge of something being good for you is not enough. Longevity and health, they're too ambiguous. They live in some unforeseen future, right? And we often think of our future selves as if a different person. So it's like, okay, yeah, I get that it's good, but that's down the line, right? That's a problem for a future Jeff, 10 years from now. Right? That's not really what's going to motivate me to put down my phone, put down my gaming, get off my couch, and go do something with my body. Right? And so the question is, what is? And so then, that's why I asked kind of, about the addictive part. I think it's really important that we highlight how pleasurable these things can become. And I say can become because I think initially they often aren't, right? Like moving your body, and obviously anybody who's really built any serious muscle or dedicated themselves to training understands like it is challenging, right? It's like you are pushing yourself, right? You are pushing yourself close to or at failure repeatedly, right? When that lactate builds up and your muscles are burning, when that weight feels like it's going to crush you, like there's so many things that are actually very quite difficult about it. And yet when you get to the other side of that, as you said, the rewards are tremendous, both psychologically in terms of, oh my God, like, you look back and you're like, wow, I just did that thing that was really, really hard. And now I feel proud of myself for achieving something that was so difficult. And then also physiologically, right, we know exercise is just releasing this chemical of neurotransmitters, right? You get this dopamine and this serotonin and this endorphin and this, all of these systems are just coming online, flooding you with all sorts of hormones that obviously are going to change your physiology, getting you feeling a different way. But you need to do exercise consistently enough to kind of start to see those rewards. And I think a lot of people don't get over that hump, or they don't find the right type of exercise that, works for their body or works for their lifestyle. And so then they give up before they really start to see some of the progress. I mean, there's so many barriers to getting people into building muscle, but that's why I kind of was curious about that question. And it goes back to a bigger point that I'd like to make around this idea of motivational flexibility, right? That there's not one single motivation that's going to get you to go build muscle, right? There are many, and they're all valid. They all have one little piece of the truth here, right? I want to build muscle because it's going to help me live long for decades to come, right? I want to build muscle because I actually really enjoy the daily act of doing something difficult and challenging myself, and it feels good, right? I want to build muscle because I like just the routine, and that daily structure actually gives some stability to my life. It just gives me something that I can focus my energy on, and that helps, keep me on track and focused, and that I find to be intrinsically rewarding. Right. Or I want to build muscle because I was in injury and I was in pain and I want to get out of pain and I don't want to be there anymore. Right. Or I don't want to be on my diabetes medicine or some other thing. Right. So like being able to draw upon all of these motivational sources without being overly attached to any single one gives you so much more power then to fuel this. Because at the end of the day, it's like, I don't really care what gets people into the gym or working on themselves. I just want to get them working. So we need to draw upon all these sources to get that motivation.
Exactly. You make so many good points. It's difficult to highlight all of them. But on that, I think you mentioned one of the motivators. And for me, I have goals. So for example, 4 squat, 4 bench, 4 deadlift, 4 pull-ups. And they're very lofty goals, and it's a 5-year plan to get to those goals. But I'm quite excited, and I'm making good progress so far. So I'm very excited to hopefully attain all of those goals in the next 5 years. That is a big goal and a big reason why I can be there. Even when I don't really feel like being there, I've had a tough day at work or feeling tired, but then that's why you got caffeine, so it can nudge you along,
So like the importance of setting goals. Yeah, this is huge, right? And like anybody who's been in the gym knows this. Any trainer, right, is going to ask you, what are your goals? And we're going to start to set some targets. And I think these things are helpful, right? Like having, like you said, I want to have some squat goals. I want to have some pull-up goals, right? This is why people sign up for competitions and for events, right? I want to run a marathon. I want to do a bodybuilding comp, right? It's like I have these goals. These focus my energy and my effort very clearly now. There's structure, right? And then there's sort of a finish line, right? And then there's a sense of competition, right? There's so many helpful things around that, And I always want to broaden people to, it's like, okay, like what's the finish line after the finish line, right? It's like when you hit those goals, then what, like what comes next? And I think that can be hard for a lot of people that have been training. It's like you prep so hard for this event, and then after the event or whatever, you hit your goals, and then there's sort of this void or this letdown, and maybe you're not as satisfied or as happy as you thought you were going to be. Which is why I think, the importance of having a larger context for why are you even bothering with any of this at all, right? Are you doing this from this place of, curiosity around like, what is my potential? I want to experience my potential as a human, as a man, as having this body, and I want to know what it's capable of. So I'm gonna push it to try to see and explore what's possible there. I think that can be like a really beautiful way into doing all of these things, right? But then there's also a shadow side where like so much fitness, especially like the really hardcore pushing, can be driven from these shadows of feeling like you're not enough.
To hear Jeff's take on how to overcome these shadows, you're going to have to tune in again on the next episode of the Muscle Growth Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Muscle Growth Podcast. If you found value in today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating and a quick review. It helps us grow and reach more people just like you. Don't forget to follow us on all major social media platforms, including Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and X. Find us at the Muscle Growth Podcast and at Reps with Roscoe. For more insights, exclusive content, and full episodes, visit themusclegrowthpodcast.com. Your support truly makes a difference, so please like, share, comment, and follow. We're grateful for every bit of it. Until next time, keep pushing your limits and staying focused on getting bigger, stronger, and better.